topic is digitizing and building your business for the future. Two very important words, digitizing and actually building your business for the future. We have the vice chairperson of the Nali Group, Lavanya Nali, with us today. She's a hands-on leader with 13 years of experience across retail, e-commerce, strategy, and operations. She started her career with the Nali Group, which is a $100 million national retail chain, focusing on new business development and growth opportunities, retail store operations, and a private label. During her tenure, Nali doubled its revenues and expanded from 14 to 21 stores. Lavanya has graduated from the Harvard Business School with an MBA in 2011 and worked at McKinsey & Company, advising CXOs of Fortune 500 companies on issues ranging from top-line growth, profit improvement initiatives. She moved to India in 2013 into the e-commerce world as VP Revenue and Shopping Experience at Myntra. She is now leading the e-commerce, private label, and expansion efforts at Nali Group of Companies. The Economic Times named Lavanya as among corporate India's fastest rising women leaders. Forbes named her as Asia's Women to Watch in 2016, an ambassador for Government of India's innovation efforts, and Niti Aayog's Champion of Change program. It's a huge pleasure for me to welcome Lavanya to this webinar. If you're excited about this webinar, type in excited on the chat box. Come on, let's build some energy before I bring her in. Type excited in the chat box. There you go. All right, so I'm going to give her a round of applause. Even if you're sitting at home, do give her a round of applause. Please welcome Lavanya.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's exciting for me to see all of those comments, and I hope that you all find something of value and inspiration to take out of these next 45 minutes that we'll be spending together. Thank you very much for having me and for that wonderful welcome and the quite nice introduction as well. Now I'll have to do justice to it. All right. So just to help with our audience here, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, all right, perfect. So just to help with our audience here, as Anmol pointed out, what we're going to be discussing is how do you digitize and renew your business and make it really future ready. And keeping in mind the profile of people that I'm speaking to, I'm going to be walking you through two stories. Right? The first one is that of my own family business, so Nali Silk Sarees. It's a 90-year plus family business established in 1928, but we are all a community. We come from the weaving community, so we've been in that trade for even before. Usually, the lifespan of a business is not that long, and also in a business like this in sarees, which is a fairly disorganized sector, both from a supply side as well as from a distribution and the demand side. So how does a family-run enterprise stay in the business for this long? And especially in this current very dynamic situation. And perhaps one of the largest disruptions that we have faced in India, and I think in my lifetime, there would be two that come to mind. One would have been in the early 90s when I was still quite young. But of course, when the economy opened up and there was much, much more competition, much more demand, and a lot of good things that happened, but it also changed the landscape from what it was till that point. The second large disruption is, of course, the e-commerce industry and sort of how we've had the entrance of these very large e-commerce players. So both it is an opportunity as well as a disruptor. So how do we as entrepreneurs ourselves capitalize on that and really make it an opportunity for our own businesses? So by walking you through the story of my own family business and how we've had different stages in our growth, I hope that you will find things to take away and resonate with. And I'll spend a little time talking about our foray into e-commerce and how we have sort of, that's the word, adapted and more than adapted. I think how we have capitalized on what that opportunity has been in the tech advancements and on of the last few years. And then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about my own personal journey as a business leader, so that during this particular sort of trying time, I think we are all feeling it with this pandemic. And many of our businesses are being stressed in ways that we probably haven't seen in a very, very, very long time. Perhaps something there might help you in terms of what I will share would be my learnings as a leader, and how I'm thinking about running a business in these times. And perhaps that will help give you food for thought in terms of your own journeys. Great. So with that, we'll sort of kick off, and Anmol, at any point in time, interrupt me if you feel the need or there's comments and you wanted to sort of take it in that direction.
Sure. Mostly we take the Q&A towards the end. Yeah.
Yes, perfect. All right. Yeah. So let's get started. So the first story that I want, let's have that slides up. And the first story that I want to do is walk you all through the journey of Nalli so far. Apologize, I'm trying to see if I can.
Manoj, you can start the screen sharing.
Perfect. All right. So if we can move that into presentation mode, and the first slide. All right. So next slide, please. Great. Okay. So let's kick off with Nalli's journey so far. So my family business, like I said, it's a 90-year-old family business. We are probably the only sari retailer with a nationwide presence in India. And we were registered in 1928. Like I said, we've had 5 generations at the helm. My brother and I would be the 5th. And we come from a family of weavers. Today, we have around 40 stores all across India and internationally. And we also retail through our own e-commerce platform, which is www.nalli.com. And each of us, currently in the business, we have 3 generations of leaders. My grandfather, who just turned 80, in fact, last year in October, and who is still currently in the business and driving the flagship store till today. My father, who was instrumental in the company's growth years in the 80s and 90s, and he's currently in the business as well, working based out of Chennai. And then my brother and I, who recently entered the business, and we both pick up different functional pieces and work together, as well as we have our own business units, which we drive. He's got Nalli Fashions with the jewelry division within that he runs in, and that's based in Chennai. And I drive the e-commerce business unit end-to-end as its CEO, in addition to the work that we do as leaders and driving some of those functional units. So let's kick off into the evolution of Nalli, and I'll go quickly through the first few phases. So if you go to the next slide. Now, the first stage is really what I call the early years at Nalli, right? This was before the 1940s. So from 1928 to 1940s, what was our journey? Like I said, we came from a family of weavers. And this is something that not a lot of people know. And they think that we are business people, but actually we're not from the community of traders, but we're from a weaving community. Somewhere along the lines, in actually pre-1920s, even before the store was registered, when we had 2 brothers in the business, which would have been my grandfather's great-great-grandfather, they decided that they would move from where they were located, the temple town of Kanjivaram. One of the brothers would actually take the saris that had been woven and go to the city of Madras, which is where a lot of customers would come from, in his cycle, door to door, because by then the name and the weaving the reputation of the weaver and the artisan had grown to that extent that people who would come to Kanjivaram would always ask for him by name and want to see his products. And so the brothers took this decision where one of them said, I will continue to weave while you, why don't you go to Chennai, go to Madras back then, maybe once in 2 weeks or so, and meet with all of our clientele. That once in 2 weeks became once a week, and then it became every few days, and then soon it would be literally every 2 days or so, where he would go in a cycle. He would, sorry, you'll have to go back to that slide. So he would go in a cycle from Kanchipuram to Madras, and then he would make it, he would present his wares, and then he would do business. He would come back, provide the feedback to the other brother in terms of what is selling, what is not selling, and so on. Eventually, they decided to make sense to set up our first store there. And so it was a very small, it was literally just a cupboard. And as you can see, in someone else's store, which was 200 square feet of space, near Kaplishwar Temple in Madras. And from there, we moved to where we registered the store in 1928, and then it is Nalli is what it is that you see today. So those were the early years, the formative phase, where the where the business values were really all about the product and about doing prudent business. The next phase is what I call the formative years. If you can go to the next slide. Right. So this is from the 1940s to 1980s. Here, what was really established for us as a brand. A lot of the reason why I call it the formative years is we went from being small-time entrepreneurs, single people, single successful business entrepreneurs, to a brand which started to get formed, and the ideals of the brand that got internalized. A few formative moments in our history that helped that to happen. The first one that you can see, we say the war is on, right? One of the big turning points actually happened during World War II. There was the story I want to share with you is, this happened during my grandfather's, my great-grandfather's time. So his father was managing the store. And there was a lot of talk that Madras was going to be bombed, it being a major seaport and, of critical importance to the British back then. And so most of the merchants and business people in the country at that time had shut shop and had gone back to their native places. This was the time when my great-grandfather took the call to say, we will keep the store open because we are now, this is now our home, not Kanjipuram anymore, even though our entire family is from there. We have to be with the business and we have to be with our customers. And so what ended up happening was, for those very tense few weeks and months when we were under constant threat of bomb, he chose to keep the store open. And so anybody across Madras who wanted any piece of cloth, from a towel to a handkerchief, would have to come all the way to Nalli. And so it really established us in terms of a player and a brand name, and the name grew. But also, I think what it established for the family members and for the next generation, and many of you as entrepreneurs may have, like I was, and continue to be also a next generation, it established that work ethic and the founding principles of our organization, which is to say, no, we are business people now. And so we must, we must take those calls in line with being fair and responsible to our employees, as well as our vendors, as well as our customers, and everybody in the entire ecosystem that depends on us and that we support. Another formative thing. Now this story, some of you might be aware, and it's the story of MS Blue. Now, legend has it, and my grandfather told me the story, when that she walked into the store once. And for those of you who don't know, she's a very legendary Carnatic musician. And she had walked into the store sometime in the early, I think 70s or 80s, and holding a small piece of thread. And she said, this blue, this is the blue that I would want for a sari, so to be made so that I can wear it at my concert. And that was and blue is one of the trickiest colors And back then it was very tricky because we didn't have the level of sophisticated technology that we have now, and and so the weavers really had to struggle. And so my grandfather worked with one of his closest weavers, and they innovated, and they came out with a blue which was the exact shade that she had wanted, and she wore it. And of course, it was a color that had never been seen before by anyone, and it was a very fetching color. And so that led to a lot of customers walking into the store, people who had seen her perform, walking into the store saying, "Look, she mentioned that she wore this and she got this made. How did you do it? We would like the same," right? So what is the founding principle there? And the founding principle was that while we are business people, we are also product first. And we continue to be very close to our product, and we will innovate. And we will do whatever is taken for the customer. So we are customer first, and then we are very product driven. And so we'll have to work with all of the people in our ecosystem. We are not retailers, right? But the core of our business really is the quality and the design of our products that we bring out. And so you have to be in the forefront and at the cutting edge of innovation. And so that was, again, a second sort of founding principle that got formed and reiterated over the years. And so there are other stories like that, which is out there in the public domain, and my grandfather's spoken about it multiple times. But some of these stories and some of these moments of truth is what has really built our business, and which the founding family got indoctrinated into and continue to establish and continue to sort of train and indoctrinate the next generation. In those years was also when our name grew by having this focus on customer and having this focus on product. And so we've seen many dignitaries to grace our store. And of course, there's a picture of that store as it continues to remain today. And what a lot of you may not know is actually, if you can see that there's a floor above that. And that top floor is where the family used to live. And even till today, my grandfather and my grandmother continue to stay there. It's our ancestral home, which has been there since the 1920s. And we continue to, as a family, because now we have siblings and cousins and all of us who are in the business in various aspects. We continue to keep that bond very strong by working, by having these non-business meetings, but dinners in the ancestral home and things like that to ensure the continuity of the family as well, not just the continuity of the business. So this was the second stage, which was the formative years, which to me was the time when we made the shift from single entrepreneur to a brand. The third phase, which is the phase that we are in now, and the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, is what I call the growth years. So this is where we are today. And I'll walk through some of these pictures. So the growth years in the 1990s till now was when my father entered the business. And what he did was set up our first store outside of Chennai. And this was in Delhi in 1991. And till then, the understanding was, and of course in 91, it was a very different market. There was no market research, there was no internet, and there was no way for us to even know really what kind of a market it is and what customers preferred and how their regional preferences changed. We used to do a few exhibition fairs, and through that we got an inkling and an understanding. And of course, we had a lot of North Indian customers who would travel to Chennai or who were based in Chennai themselves, who would give us feedback. But that was very few data points. And with that, really what we did was we just set up the store, which is, I guess, what entrepreneurs do, right? They take that risk that many people otherwise would not do. And we set up the first store in 91, and we learned on the ground. And the entire, what my dad had taken as a loan from his father for setting up that first store, on day one, with those day sales, he was able to pay it all back. So that was the kind of reception that we had received when we set up that store. And since then, it has grown from strength to strength, and now we have around 40 stores across India and globally. And again, spearheaded by my father and supported by a very strong team. Now, especially now in the last few years that my brother and I have also been in the business, so we take up different aspects functionally and sort of look at the overall growth and expansion. The other two ways, and this is the point which I guess a lot of you would be interested in sort of hearing, is the other disruptor that I spoke about. But to me, it was more of an opportunity and not really a disruption, was the internet and the advancements that we've had in technology and the sort of opportunities that it opened up for us. So we were one of the, I think back then, it was a very early time for us to have set up a website presence. And we've had a website presence since almost 2004, 2000. We've had a website since the early 2000s, but not doing e-commerce on it. E-commerce started in a very rudimentary way around 2005, 2006, when I was part of the business. And then it was still being done in a very small scale manner, because see, back then, the technology hadn't grown to that degree. Social media was non-existent, and so you didn't really have ways to in which you could directly reach out and market to customers, in which you could target customers. The customer segment also had not primarily moved on to online as any kind of legitimate channel. And also our customer segment, who tend to be older, more traditional, typically in their outlook, and women, also were not the profile of people who were venturing online. And so it was really ahead of the curve back then. And it was really not a very strong business at all in terms of contribution to top line or any of that. But what we had done then, and even back then I spearheaded this, was to say, look, there is an opportunity. Take the opportunity, because by the time we wake up to it becoming a mainstream opportunity, it would be too late. Other players would have already established themselves. And so when it is still in a nascent stage, pick it up. The major disruption that we faced was actually, so that was always an opportunity, but the real disruption that happened was, I would say, around the 2012, 13, 14, those years, when a lot of the large horizontal e-commerce players entered the business and really took it mainstream. And what I mean by enter the business is the retail business, not specifically with saris. But what they did was a few disruptions, which I'm sure folks here in this audience would know. A heavy, because of the funding scenario, right? What those companies could do was have a very aggressive marketing budget and very aggressive pricing and marketing policies. And so those were the years where there was a lot of channel conflict, where the e-commerce channel would drastically cannibalize the very same brand if it also had a offline presence. And of course, since 2014, 15, when that behavior was at its peak, till now, there has been a lot more collaboration within the market to recognize that this is an unsustainable policy for brands, where one channel is cannibalizing the other, where storefronts which have such high cost structures and fixed costs such as rent and so on are having to become showrooms, and the conversions are actually being, are actually happening online. And this was true especially of things like electronics, and especially true of things like fashion, industries like fashion, where the consumer would walk into the store in order to trial it, but then would pull up their app and hunt for the exact same SKU, find it online at a discounted price. And so since then, I think there has been a lot of push and talk in the industry to move towards some sort of collaboration, where the older inventory is kind of being pushed onto the online channels at discounts and at discounted rates. But the newer inventory, there's a moratorium on them going below a certain price point, just to prevent that cannibalization. I think that has started to happen. The other thing that we have started to see is a lot of manufacturers themselves, or the brands themselves, are having their own direct-to-consumer platforms. So that is a big shift from 2013, when a lot of players were forced to list on the very top horizontal players because they didn't have the tech expertise in-house, nor the teams in-house, nor the money also, to develop a full-fledged platform on the same scale as some of these very large horizontal players. So we'll talk a little bit about this in the Q&A, but the long story short, what if I had to look at this space and talk specifically about the digitization process at Nalli? I think one thing which we did was, we said, look, even if there is a small chance of it succeeding, even if it is going to be a very insignificant contributor to the top line, go ahead and invest in it. But we will invest in our own way, which means that we are not going to have high cash burn. We are not going to burn money at the expense of profitability, because that is not in line with our business founding principles. Because we have always been a prudent family-run business where we build our stores. I mean, if you take the stores example, every store is a profit center, right? So it breaks even within a certain time period. Then it starts contributing towards the corpus for funding new stores growth. We are extremely conservative in the kind of debt that we take on, and we have no external funding whatsoever. So we've taken all of those calls and we've been fairly prudent, and we are using the internal generation of funds to fuel all of our growth opportunities. So when we have taken that approach, we will continue to take those founding principles even when it comes to e-commerce. But what that means is we have to take certain compromises. It is not possible in this kind of a scenario where the giants of e-commerce are battling with each other, for a player which doesn't have that kind of a war chest when it comes to the funding and when it comes to the marketing budgets. It becomes difficult for a player like that to grow profitably unless to grow profitably, full stop. Because if you really are looking for scale and to grow at that kind of a pace and to do that volume of business, then we will have to start looking at discounts, and we will have to start looking at very aggressive marketing budgets. But we took that call not to grow at that level of scale. We grew at our own pace. So we set our own aggressive targets, what we consider as aggressive growth. And we set very strong EBITDA targets and very strong profitable targets. And we said, look, whatever happens, your profitability metric and your cash burn cannot go beyond this, right? Because the idea is that even your e-commerce channel has to be a legitimate channel which can stand on its own feet, which means that you cannot expect that the offline stores are going to subsidize your growth. And so we set our own targets, and we built it in our own way, where we were very prudent in terms of the places where we focused our efforts. The bulk of our people are actually the warehouse and frontline people, the studio operations, the tech people, and we have very little sort of overhead, which is and very little sort of mid-management, which is very in line with our flat hierarchy that you would see at Nalli and the family business, and completely the opposite of what you would see with some of these larger e-commerce players. So both from a talent perspective, from an org building perspective, the strategic decision that we took to develop our own platform, as opposed to looking for scale and listing in another platform, was also one that we took. And that was simply, and it was two fronts. One was an economic decision. The second was from a brand perspective. The economic decision was very straightforward. Nalli operates on an extremely low margin, high volume, right? And we do that through just-in-time inventory, and we do that through operational excellence. What that means is we don't have the latitude to pay the kind of listing fees that most of these organizations, most of the e-commerce platforms were looking for. And so we took that call to say, then we are not going to list there, and we are going to develop our own e-commerce platform, even if it takes a while. And we did that. And the hunch and the bet that we took was, look, the customer back then in 2012, 13, and 14 was probably a highly discount-driven customer, a discount seeker. But the pace at which the Amazons and the Flipkarts and the Mintras of the world were bringing a lot of these customers and making them comfortable with the digital medium was happening at such a pace that it will soon, even once the bargains and the discounts start drying up and they start getting less and less deep, by that time they would have gotten so much of our consumers base comfortable with shopping in the online medium that we can then capitalize on that mainstream. So this was the hypothesis that we had, and we tested it out, and luckily we've been, I think, right with that hypothesis. It took a little longer than what we had modeled in terms of how deep those discounts were going to be that the horizontal players were putting, and how long that they could afford to do it just because of the funding situation and the watches that they had. But the principles were the same. And the stages that we had envisioned in terms of first the early adopters and then the bargain seekers and then more of the mainstream public getting comfortable with shopping online, that principle and those stages and that evolution of the industry has actually been fairly in line with what we had modeled it out. But for that to happen, we had to be really future thinking and think of it as a channel and not say this is this is cannibalizing or that some other players are eating my lunch, but basically to say, look, this is a channel. It is getting popular. My consumers are using it more and more every day. I would start seeing my customers, even my own customers, the older profile of women with a more conservative approach who are not very technologically advanced. But we would see them on their phones all the time, on Facebook, on WhatsApp, and we'd say, look, this medium is here to stay. So we have to get ourselves in the minds of our customers before somebody else takes that away from us and some other brand starts to grow. And we will do it in our way by keeping a focus on low margins. So you will get those products at an unbeatable price. So I know the margins of my other players because their cost structures on e-commerce is so high. They need to have a very high margin. Then they have that very high margin and then they do a discounting, and we've chosen not to do that. And so by taking those kinds of very intentional business calls and strategic decisions, we've been able to compromise on scale by design and to say we are not going to grow at 5x, 6x year on year, but we're going to grow at 3x. We're going to grow at 2x year on year. And we're going to do it with a very strong view on profitability, which means that this business has to stand on its own 2 feet. It cannot do even 1 rupee of cost of loss beyond this time frame, the same yardstick that we set for the other stores. But of course, given the e-commerce situation and how difficult that was, we had to calibrate those yardsticks, but the principles were the same. It had to still live by those rules. So that was the stages of our company, and we continue to grow and we continue to move into the future and whatever dynamic challenges are out there and are emerging in the retail and in the apparel field. I'll come to probably the last few sections, and I'll skip the part about my own personal journey since I want to leave some time for Q&A. So if we can move to the next slide. So when we look at this journey of Nalli, what are the big lessons and the key takeaways that I would like to leave you all with? A few things that stood out for me as a next generation entrepreneur who entered the field is I had a very strong training and I had a very strong understanding. The training was not formalized, by the way. It was all indoctrination. And it was all an apprenticeship-based training. But what I had understood right from childhood and right from my early years when I entered the family business was, what are the core values of this business? Whatever happens, what are these core values? Now, large organizations, when they say we want to professionalize, some of them go and they write these core values and these core statements and they put it up on walls and everywhere. See, but it's not about writing the set of core values, but it's about the trade-offs. Core values are meant for the leaders of any organization, whether those leaders continue to be family members. They would be you, and then They would be the future generation later on, and their siblings and their cousins and so on. Or it would be the professionals who sort of come in at a later stage, and they need to have the same judgment and same values as the owners and the proprietors of the business. So core values are basically a way to say there are multiple ways in which we can build a business, but what are the ones which we value and we are willing to make those trade-offs, right? So what you choose to not do and what you choose to not pursue is as equally important as what you choose to pursue. And by definition, our core values actually implicitly indicate what it is that we are not chasing in pursuit of what it is that that we do believe is important, and we do believe is essentially nully. So one, for example, product is king. Whatever happens, it's all about the product. It's all about that sari. We have because we come from a weaving family, those are our roots. That's what matters to us. Whatever happens, we'll not compromise on that for the sake of scale or for the sake of, whatever it is. The high quality product, having the best when it comes to the product, not having something generic, not being an also ran, becoming extremely involved, and putting merchandise at the core of our business became one of our tenets. So even today, the very senior team members, even the owners of the business, my father and my grandfather, and it's incredible what the internet and what technology has done, because we keep following up to see our Google store reviews and Facebook comments and things like that. And if a person comes on there and they say, you know what, I walked into this branch in this city and the salespeople did not seem very interested. Or I walked into this branch in this city and your collections is really not as good as what I would expect. The founders themselves will get in touch. So we have a team that does it. But what I'm saying is the founders themselves, because it's a core value, product and merchandise, every single founder looks into it. It's not about numbers, but it's in whatever way that we get that information. Numbers also, what is your sell-through rate, right? Like what is your optimal stock levels? Are you keeping that? But also, where is the qualitative feedback coming from your customers? Are they saying that, oh, collections are not so good, you used to have, but now it's not so great, this other store has it? Immediately the founders get into it. Immediately we start working with our weaving community and our business partners and our suppliers and say, why is it that such products exist in other stores but Nulli doesn't have access to it? Because we are number one and we are a nationwide player. It has to hit here first. So what's going on, right? And we put a lot of pressure on, the pressure is almost like it happens organically. When the founder and the owner of the business starts asking those questions, how come this store, this region is not having the best access to the best product? What's going on? Customers are saying that the collection is not so good. What's happening? And the founder themselves starts taking that interest. There is no way that a store head will be able to be complacent. Automatically, he will kick into gear. Automatically, he will start looking at that number. He may be defensive initially to say, oh, for this reason, sell-through rate, for this reason, footfall is down, for this reason, conversions are down. But trust me, when that role modeling behavior is there from the owners of the business and the entrepreneurs, whoever you have, professional management, next generation, siblings, cousins in the business, if they are in charge of that particular business unit, automatically they will take their guidance. And so for us, product is king. Every single person needs to know merchandise. I need to know at any given point in time what my merchandise is, both in terms of the quantitative metrics, in terms of my sell-through rate and in terms of my levels, my merchandise levels, and in terms of sales per counter and things like that, as well as from a qualitative standpoint. What am I hearing from customers? What are the trends in the business? Booties used to be really strong, but now almost everybody has shifted away to silk jacquard. People are innovating where they are looking, even people from Kanjipuram are innovating, where they are having linen in the body and they're having a silk pallu. So those kinds of insights, even the founders of the business need to know, because product and merchandise for us is our core. Anything for the customer, second tenet, very similar to to that story with MS Blue. So I'll give you another very quick story. I experienced this when I was young, when I was 21 and I joined the family business for the first time. There was no real training manual, nothing. So I said, okay, I will learn from the person who knows the most, which is the salesperson. So I went and stood behind the sales counter. I was 21 years old and I learned from him. And once one of his very loyal customers, one of our Nalli's loyal customers came, asked for the salesperson by name. He's been working with our store for 35 years now. This is the flagship store, Nalli Chinnasamy Chetty. She asked for him by name and said, listen, this is what I want. I want exactly this kind of zari. I want exactly this kind of contrast pallu, these colors, and so on and so forth. And he looked through his shelf and he said, we don't have it right now. I know, he called up his supplier and said, I know he can get it for you in 7 days. And she said, yes, but there's a function in the family which is in 5 days. What can I do about that? Immediately, this salesperson said, wait here one moment. He went outside. He found a sari, like he gave her, coffee and sat her down and made her very comfortable. And he was chatting with me for a while. He came back in 20 minutes with a very similar sari and said, I have already purchased this. It's from a different store. I can vouch for that store and the quality of this because I know. Would you like this? If you would, I will bring it up to you. And she said, yes. And I was astounded. And I asked him later and I said, how could you, what did you do? That was a sale. I understand, but why did you go and make a purchase from another store and you came and gave it? And he said, think about this. Tomorrow, if this lady wants any kind of product, she knows that she can trust Nalli because I'm not about making that sale today. But she knows that she can come to Nalli for any problem also. I have a function, I have something, can you do it? And somehow or the other, I will do that for her. Your grandfather taught me this, and now I am teaching you this. That stuck out in my mind. I was 21 years old and I was an engineer and I'd never seen the business in that light. And so even today, we have that same belief that at the core, don't try and do a short-term sale. And we tell our salespeople and we tell our customer care people, and especially on online, don't try and do a short-term sale. Be long-term focused. That customer, what happens if you go on discounts? That customer is going to feel cheated. They're going to come back saying, or even if they buy, they're going to go home and think, I paid 7,000 rupees for this. Did I pay too much? If I had waited another 5 days, would it have gone on discount? So don't do it. Don't do these tricks, even if the rest of the industry are doing. Be very clear in what you're solving for the customer and stay true to that. Right? The third tenet, family extends to employees, and especially so now in this pandemic and in this crisis. The way we take care of our families is how you will take care of our employees. In whatever way possible. Yes, stores are shut, but and I know that some people have cut wages in the month of April, in the month of March itself, because there were many days when Tamil Nadu was shut down and stores were shut and couldn't do business. But we modeled it out, we worked out, and because luckily we have been fairly prudent in our approach and our business practices, we were able to give out 100% of our wages in March without any kind of a cut, right? So taking those kinds of calls, and then many of our employees got stuck. And even in Bangalore, for example, which is where I'm located with the e-commerce division, many of them got stuck. Suddenly the lockdown was announced. They didn't have access to basic groceries. We did that. So we did a run and we helped out people who were unable to travel so that they had something to sustain them. Why does this matter? Because so many people today talk about attrition, and that's true. But by and large, people want to work for a company that will take care of them, that is stable, that has the stability and the business prudence to weather these kinds of tough situations, and they know that their job is secure. And so our attrition rate is very low, and that's because we take these calls and we tell them upfront, look, we are not the best paymasters in the industry, but what you get is stability, security, and a very, very strong base. And what we look for is loyalty. And so there's a little bit of self-selection as well in terms of the kinds of employees who value that work within our organizations, and those who don't value that, it's good, I believe, that you know what you stand for and what kinds of employees you want to attract and hold on to, because what's more costly is you make a wrong hire, and then they come and then they're disgruntled because their core values don't match up with the organization's cultural values and so on. Frugality, like I said, the family business, the business family, the needs of the family have been fairly prudent. We take out whatever we need for our own sustenance. Everything we pull back into the organization to fund future growth, and we take out, we earmark some amount for philanthropic initiatives. We don't talk about it too much, but even before CSR for years now, we've been involved in the cultural space, in patronizing the arts and cultures and the Carnatic music industry in the south, as well as the weaving community in Kanjivaram and elsewhere, as well as a lot of educational ventures. And so we are only able to do that and have that kind of impact in the larger community because we are fairly frugal. And then the last two things very quickly is entrepreneurial training. Like I said, less of very stringent training and SOPs and these rotational programs. We didn't have that, but we had entrepreneurial training. All of us who entered the family business, and even including outside professionals who moved up to senior positions. And entrepreneurial training is different from business training, because entrepreneurial training is mainly, primarily, in my view, about risk and your appetite to risk and your agility to correct. When we take a bet with imperfect information, sometimes the bet is right, sometimes it's wrong. When it is wrong, how quickly do you kick in and start to self-correct without blaming and without trying to sort of, basically it's agility. So that's entrepreneurial training, not leadership training. And then the final one is really operational excellence. Like I said, product is king, everything for the customer, frugality, for all of this to, for us to hold on to all of these core values and to continue to have a strong and lasting, profitable business. We took the call to say we are going to focus on operational excellence, which means that implicit in that statement, we are saying we're not about marketing. We are not about branding. We are not about price it at a very significant margin so that you can run these, twice a year, end of season sale, and you can do these sorts of, discounts and stuff. We don't have the margins to do that kind of discount. We operate on a very strong operational excellence. And what we do is we give a lot of ownership, which is why I said the entrepreneurial training. So every store head, we tell them, listen, we don't have one centralized division sitting somewhere which is going to do the merchandising. You cannot do any kind of pricing. You cannot do any kind of discounting. Nali is known for that, no discounts, because that's an entry barrier. Nobody else can achieve the kind of margins, can do business with the kind of margins that we do at the scale that we do, right? With having such low overhead. So we're not supporting you with one full, with a full marketing and a merchandising department and any of that. As a store head, you have to achieve these targets, and you cannot use pricing as a lever. So if he takes a bet and the bet is wrong on merchandise, he thought that it'll be a big hit, but it's not. What does he do, right? So this is a place where they become very scrappy and they think as entrepreneurs themselves, and they start doing stock transfers and they speak to each others to say, okay, listen, this demand is slowing down in this particular region, but how is it in that region? Can I transfer some of my products to you, right? And they have to work in a collaborative fashion together as a team for them to be able to achieve this. They cannot do marketing, pricing, discounting. We have taken away that lever, but what we have given them is autonomy. And what we have supported them with is the entrepreneurial training to say, look, you have autonomy. You pick what inventory levels you want. You pick which specific suppliers and which inventory. You run each store as its own turf. And that's the only way, in a very decentralized yet autonomous and entrepreneurial way, we can really grow with that kind of nimbleness and hit that sort of scale, and support it with a sort of data visibility and management dashboards that we'll require. So with this, we'll sort of come to the end of our I think the very last slide, the next one would be my last slide. If I had to put it all together, I would say our core values at Nalli, if we could move to the next slide, please, is really, when I put it all together, it's our family values as well as our business values. The business values is what everybody in the organization should know, that this is what we prioritize. And so nowhere here do we say we'll do marketing. We'll consider it. We consider things like, can you do loyalty programs? Okay, but then that means that you'll have to raise the margins, because now a loyalty program is going to be margin dilutive. Does it impact and hurt any of our core principles? So we go through it systematically, right? Does it hurt our operational excellence because now your margins are going up? And if the answer is yes, then we don't do it, right? Everybody in e-commerce in this new channel is now discounting. How can I survive unless I also discount? So, but does it hit our core values? Yes, it does. So then don't discount. Find another way, innovate. In our case, the answer became that we developed our own platform and we had a much longer runway. And now now you're seeing that business really growing. But we had spent that time on the talent and building the platform and doing it systematically and in a very bootstrap manner till where it got to today. And now we can, of course, really turbocharge it with omni-channel and a whole bunch of these other initiatives. But so that's what we do. We look at all of the business opportunities and we compare it against the business values to see, are they in line? And if they are reinforcing, then we go ahead and we do it. But if they are out of line, if fundamentally your strategy around operational excellence and limited to zero marketing has to change in order for you to list on certain platforms, then it's hitting at too many core values. We choose not to do it. We'll say, but we will still go ahead and we will capitalize on this channel, but we will do it in a different way. This particular manner of listing through the larger players doesn't make sense for us. And so we are not going to go down that path. And that's the business values. And then of course we have the family values, which is really about, and we were speaking about this earlier, which is really about continuity of the business. What about the next generation? Because in our case, it's a family business. And so what are the mindsets and what are the trainings that you need to do for anybody who is going to be a potential leader in your business going forward? We give them that stewardship mindset, which means it's not an owner mindset. It's not your company. You build it and you can do with it what you want. You're a steward for the next generation. Build it, grow it, pass it on to the next generation. Grow at a pace which really enriches the entire ecosystem and positively impacts everybody, from the supplier to the artisans, to the weavers, to your employees, to your own family members, and you're able to give them a legacy that you have built on top of, and you support them with this kind of training so that the next generation is able to take the same kind of judgment calls. Frugality, thrift, keeping your own needs low, so that don't draw salary, right? My father has never taken a salary from the business. My grandfather either. Like I said, the needs are very small, and then the rest of it they put back into philanthropy or into business expansion and growth. If you're taking a salary, take a nominal one. Take what you need, right? But don't starve the business in order for you to feed yourself. Once that starts to happen, and typically it happens when you go to second generation and third generation and fourth generation, this is when we really need to think about it and say, okay, our family value is getting hurt now, and how can we innovate around this, and how can we add some structure to it? So that's how I think about it, and that's the journey of Nalli. And I won't talk about my own journey for now. I think I've walked you through enough that we can now possibly move on to a Q&A session.
Thank you, madam. And a lot of takeaways for us. And the customer first, product is the king. Very enjoyed those DNAs of your company, and fantastic session. And over to Anmol. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those wonderful insights. We have a barrage of questions coming in. So let me get started. Rajendran is asking, what percentage of your total sales is happening online?
Okay. Now it's, so I won't reveal it fully, but I'll say it's in the double digits.
Sure.
It's, but I won't give you the exact figures. it is also, the other thing is it is also growing by leaps and bounds. When we started, it was insignificant. I'm not even counting the years before 2015 when I rejoined the business, right? Because it was insignificant. But let's just take, for example, the last 4 years, right? Since because I was away from the family business for a while. I did my MBA from Harvard, then I was with McKinsey in the US. Then I joined Myntra, I was a VP there. That's when I really saw, okay, I don't agree maybe with the discounting strategy, but I definitely see that online as a platform and as a channel is here to stay. We have shifted the consumer mindset, and bulk of India is below the age of 35. So that generation below the age of 35, 65% of India, they are digital native. They grew up with the internet and they grew up comfortable with technology. Those are the people who are the consumers of your product. And so we've got to reach them in a medium that they are comfortable with which is the internet and e-commerce and social media. And so we took those calls to say, we got to get into this and treat it the way you would treat any other store, not do it as a small side business, and definitely not do it in this discounting manner, right? Because I don't know when the end for that is. If you start discounting, you collapse all your core values of the family business. It's not worth it. But it's a legitimate channel. We have to do it properly. The first 6 months, we did nothing but build the platform. I am not joking. We had 2 developers. That's it. Because again, it's a very prudent, we did it bootstrapped. With 2 developers, we built the whole channel. We work directly with our suppliers. We have other issues with our SKUs because every sari is a unique product, especially in handloom. Once the SKU is sold, it's sold. You don't have the depth. So you have to shoot and upload so many products. And there is a cost associated with having that image quality and all of that. Once the product is sold, it's sold. You will have another product from the weaver, but he would have made some changes. So, and in the internet business, what you see is what you get. You cannot say it is similar. You have to spend that. So we again went back to basics, operational excellence. How can you work on, so if you can go to, any of you at any time can go to nalli.com and definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts. So we optimize to say image quality cannot drop below a certain level, but yet you have to hit a certain productivity per day, because that's the only way that you can get the image cost down to so many rupees per image. And even if you are not able to buy in depth for a certain product range, you're still able to you bake that into the price of your product without doing a significant increase in your margin. So those kinds of calls is what we have taken.
Sure. These days it's very difficult to find good developers, so share the names of those 2 people. Just kidding. Okay. Yeah. So as a follow-up question, so you foresee this channel growing. This is something over the next 5 years, right? So your advice to a lot of textile entrepreneurs will be to explore online channels as well.
Yes, because there are 2 trends. Both of them are exponentially growing, and 2 trends in your favor. Number 1, India's youth and India's consumer base is very young. They are digitally native and they're getting more and more comfortable with shopping online. And in fact, if anything, this pandemic, when we are all in lockdown, I think we're going to see a big surge. Because even people who traditionally don't like to go grocery shopping now have started doing that. And if you look at how Amazon started, first it was books. First, people would only buy books as a category. Then they would move to media, which at that time was CDs, DVDs, and so on. Then they would start moving to electronic, then finally to fashion items and so on. So people will start getting comfortable with buying groceries online. Then they'll get comfortable with buying something else online. Then they'll get comfortable finally, eventually, with buying saris and dresses and clothing online. So even though we feel that, listen, touch and feel is required and fit is required, the consumer is getting more and more comfortable every day with buying online, especially since now they have gotten used to the big e-commerce players where they can buy, they can try, they can send it back. Those reverse supply chain costs are extremely high, right? So for us with our margins, we can't do that. But think about that customer, someone who had so much of a hesitation to buy a product online, now thinks, oh, it's no shipping is free and I can return it also. So for the first time they buy something online, they have a good experience. Now they are ready. Now they are ready to buy more products online, which historically we never thought. So that's one. And I would say, please don't undervalue or underestimate that consumer sentiment, because it's already there. People are getting comfortable. Even if touch and feel is required for fabric and things like that. These saris have dual tone, you have to see it in the light. But despite all of that, people are getting comfortable. The second thing is technology. Technology is becoming a huge leveler. Amazon Web Services was a massive game changer. Now you don't need to spend so much money in having your own dedicated servers. Anybody can set up a store. Companies like Shopify have come online. Anybody with just products can set up a Shopify store. Social media as a direct marketing channel never existed. Now you can go onto Instagram and set up your own WhatsApp business account. Go onto Facebook with very minimal costs. Technology has improved so much that with very minimal costs, anybody with a product and the entrepreneurial spirit can go directly to the consumer. So these two trends are there. The consumer is ready, has become ready. And the opportunity has existed. The opportunity has evolved, right? So today, the barrier to entry for entrepreneurs has become very low. So if you don't enter it, someone else will. So capitalize on your own opportunity.
Sure. Gokul is asking that you spoke about no discounts as your policy. How do you handle dead stock or non-moving stock?
Same thing. So we give very strict guidelines we give few but strict guidelines to our store heads. So one is, we basically say, look, 0 dead stock. That's it. That's a guideline. But it's such a strict one. It's only one. So then we say, okay, so now that we give you this mandate, we cannot give you further guidelines and hamstring you. So for example, so we give you this very strict guideline, 0 dead stock, and we give you another guideline, 0 discounting. So then now I cannot tell him, but listen, in Kanjivaram, you must have an optimal inventory level of so much, and in this price bracket, you must have so much. We don't tell him anything. We guide them, but they take their own calls. And then we guide them by saying things like, optimize on, say, inventory turnover. Make sure that your entire inventory turns over in 30 to 45 days, right? Some of your higher priced inventory may turn over in a slightly longer time frame. Your lower priced one should be like moving off the shelf very quickly, so that if you have taken a bad bet, you're able to take corrective action immediately, right? So you do something similar to like a sale or purchase, where if you're and buy in small quantities, don't have massive lead times, because if you have massive lead times, then it becomes very difficult for you to take that kind of corrective action. You've already made a bet, right? Then liquidation is the only way. But today we do stock inverts every single day. During Diwali time, each of our stores do it twice a day. They're constantly replenishing the shelf. We don't have a single warehouse, so nothing is sitting and aging. So that's how we keep that focus, to say if there is corrective measures you need to take. You're saying that, okay, in this counter, I'll give you an example. Salesperson in, say, the Ikkat's counter is saying, usually I have around 100 pieces on my shelf. I have those 100 pieces. I have it in those price categories, decent stock levels, decent designs also. But every day I used to sell 40, then it became 38 on average, then it became 35, now it's become 32. Immediately you can take corrective action and start giving that feedback back. Or he'll come back and say, we're not doing those kinds of sales. Every day a customer comes to me and says, I want this kind of booties. How come you don't have it? The other stores have it. Immediately we flow that back to our weavers. And because we have such a large network of smaller weavers, we are able to get it in small batch sizes, and it hits our shelf much sooner. So we focused on operational excellence, and we've given them autonomy. So we'll give them guidelines to say, do it this way. Focus on inventory turns, focus on sell-through rate, focus on these kinds of things. And then we help them with visibility. Every day we sort of get on that call, and then we all discuss it as heads to say, okay, listen, how's your inventory situation? How's your merchandising situation? How's your aging situation? And things like that. that automatically gives them the kind of discipline, but we don't force them to pick and to keep certain kinds of merchandise. We give them that autonomy, because if we force you not to have liquidation as a lever and you cannot have dead stock, then somewhere we have to give you that flexibility, which we do in the terms of they get to optimize their merchandise.
Ma'am, one question. Actually, the fast fashion now in the traditional items like sarees, whether those kind of fast fashion you used to consider, number one. Number two, what would be the approximate size of the market in India? Even Titan-like brands are entering sarees now. So whether market is growing, for example, we used to say Indian domestic market is growing at the rate of 10%. So such kind of a growth is happening in saree segment also. Throw some lights on that.
Okay, so I'll try to answer that to the best of my exposure. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We are able to hear.
Yeah,
Yes.
we are with you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Sorry, I apologize.
No problem.
Okay. Okay. So two things. One, I never trust the large market reports on this because it's a fragmented industry, right? It's not that I don't trust it. It's just that it becomes very hard to get numbers for an industry that is fairly disorganized. But for our own business, so I'll take a step back and I'll say this. If you look at the sari market, the size of it, depending on what you would consider the sari market, the overall total market may be 70 to 80,000 crores. But the addressable market, if you remove synthetics and if you remove certain products below a certain price point, if you remove that, right? The Titans, for example, and Nalli would, while we are a fairly accessible brand, there's a certain average price point that we have also. And so for us, the addressable market would probably be closer to around 35,000 crores.
Okay.
In terms, that's the size. Then the second thing is the growth. In terms of growth, the sari industry is growing probably the slowest compared to the other industries like, say, women's fusion wear, women's Western wear, or even women's stitched ethnic wear. But having said that, there's growth and then there's size. In terms of size, it is one of the largest. In terms of growth, it is growing a little slower. What does this mean for businesses in this space? I have a slightly controversial opinion on this. Unless your industry is heavily consolidated, unless your industry, the top 5 companies in your industry have captured 80% of market share, you do not need to worry about growth. Because the market share that you're going to capture is going to come from the disorganized brands.
Correct.
You as a brand can grow, right? So if you look at Nalli, our size compared to the overall market size of 35,000 crores, are we a 35,000 crore business? No. So my growth should actually be looking at that.
Okay. Great, madam. I understand.
Sure. We have a question which I believe is a question a lot of people want to ask. We are into commodity business, which is product driven. So basically the competition and I have the same quality, and of course both are claiming it's the best. So apart from that, what is the extra value to customers? Because it's a commodity, highly price conscious market. What could be a differentiator in this case?
If product cannot be your differentiator, because product is not inherent, like for us, we were lucky to be in to be in a sari business, which is fashion, right? So you can have differentiated products, but if product is not the differentiator, then what is it? Is it customer service levels? Is it, what is it that your customers value beyond product? I think those are the questions to ask. Are they looking for reliability when it comes to delivery of the products? Are they looking for consistency, right? Are they looking for extremely high quality control? What is it that they are looking for, right? Are they looking for very short lead times? Where can you build an edge? If it cannot be product, then even there I would pressure test that and say, really think, is it true you cannot build it in that, right? Because even in the most commoditized
We can always keep pushing on quality. We can always keep pushing on some of these metrics. But if it is truly a commoditized industry and you cannot, then if the answer has to be price and efficiency, right? Can you do that? If it becomes very difficult to fight on the price and an efficiency frontier, businesses are willing to pay extra value for a partnership that they trust, right? Because they know that this player is going to be in the industry even 5 years from now, 10 years from now. This player is going to be there. This player, whatever happens, his lead times are fantastic. His quality control is fantastic. There's a reason why they will tend to associate with someone and say, even if he is a little more expensive than this next best, I trust this person, I go with him. We all do it. We all do it as entrepreneurs in the people that we choose to partner with. Sometimes you have paid higher for a service, but because you know you can trust that business partner. It's the same mindset that I would apply here. I would say start with the customer, whoever your customer is, find out what is his most critical pain points and see, okay, where can I be indispensable to this person? And I will do that. Whether it is lead time, whether it is quality, whatever it is. So that's where I say values matter. Pick the one or two things because you'll make a trade-off. You can't do all of it.
Correct. Satish sir, you are.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Ms. Lavanya, I have two questions to you. One is, we just would like to know about your marketing, brand and marketing strategy a bit about marketing and brand strategy for Nalli. Secondly, what you would really advise for entrepreneurs who want to really start a fashion brand from scratch? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So first, the branding and marketing strategy. Like you said, for years and years and decades, we've had a zero marketing, right?
Oh, okay.
Now we have a small scale limited marketing. It's very targeted, right? And for two reasons. Number one, if you ask people to think about the big, say, fashion players in India, ethnic wear players, in saris, of course, Nalli comes to mind automatically. Right? But also, if you speak to, say, people from Chennai, they'll say Pothys, of course, and Pothys does spend on marketing, but they may also, depending on if you're asking a wedding customer, they'll say Sundari Silks, they'll say Tulsi. Right? They don't spend that much on marketing. That's one. The other thing is the other player. If you broaden it out and you say, okay, a homegrown Indian retailer, Fab India always comes to mind.
Yes.
You look at how much Fab India has spent their marketing budget as a % of top line. Compare it to someone like, say, Amazon. You cannot even compare it.
Yes.
But look at the kind of brand recall and equity and leverage that a player like Fab India or a player like Nalli has. And that's because they've taken certain prudent calls. Now, what we do is, for us, many of our storefronts, the storefront itself operates as a billboard. So we're very clear. We don't compromise. And we'll look and look and look and look, and we'll take slightly a longer time frame compared to others for our growth, compared to others, right? And we look at each property that we set up, and we ensure that it has the full frontage, it has accessibility, it has car parking and all of that. And that itself behaves like a billboard and a visibility if you have it really in high street locations or in some of the best malls. The second thing that of course, you've got to work that out with rent and all of that. The second thing also is because we have such a thoughtful, measured, and I would say slow approach. Because we do that, the probability of a Nalli store shutting down is virtually zero. I can name in the last 10 years. And it will not even fill up the fingers of one hand, right? And many of them are not shut down also. It's more of, but what I mean is, what does that do for your reputation in the industry? Because that also matters. That also matters because landlords would want to have tenants who are going to be here. You're not always coming back renegotiating rent, always coming back. You set up 100 stores in 1 year and then you shut down 20, 25 stores and you say, oh, that's the cost of scale. We've taken the call to say, no, Scale is the cost of profit, and scale is the cost of sustainability. So we are okay. So what? Give up on scale, but be a brand, be a name that consumers recognize and your business partners trust and value, and they want to do business with someone who is a solid player.
Be consistent. That's very
Yeah.
important. Anmol, any final questions?
Yes, we have one final question, which is by Jay, and he's saying that Nali was already a reputed brand before it went online. What about a lot of other brands who don't have a great offline presence and they're trying to do online?
This is the best time. See, now I'm talking maybe a little philosophy, but in life, every opportunity can be viewed as an opportunity or a threat. Right? But that is why we are entrepreneurs, because fundamentally there is something about us that makes us more accepting of risk, and that makes us view more of such disruptive situations as opportunities and not as threats. So I would say, number one, as a leader, reach deep and find that mindset and say, okay, it's never too late, right? It's never too late, because even today, do the math and do the numbers. What percentage of the industry exists? What's the size of the industry? What percentage of that market share is captured by a few consolidated, organized players? What percentage of that industry and the sales is actually happening online versus offline? So it is still a very nascent stage. It is still in a very high growth stage. And in a high growth nascent stage, which means that it is not a mature industry, people are forgiving, consumers are forgiving of mistakes that you make. They are not looking for efficiency. The cost of failure is not high. The cost of not doing anything is very high. So, okay, set up something on Shopify. Maybe you'll make some mistakes. So what, right? Set up a small channel. Decide how much of a cash burn you are willing to incur. Really work that out with your CFO and your CAs and everybody to make sure that you have a very strong approach. Approach it the way that you would any other store or any other channel, and say, this is the nuts and bolts of it. Then break that down to say what your targets are and what your expenditure is going to be. Then function by function, look at it and say, which can I outsource? Which do I want to keep in-house? So for example, we took that call, even though we had so many opportunities to outsource the building of the platform. We said, no, I want to build it completely in-house with 2 developers, and they took forever to do it, but we did it. And of course, now we are growing. But we built it in-house because we have so much flexibility. And now I can do things like saying, listen, increase the page view. It's a sari. I need 6 images. I can't deal with 3. For saris which are about 25,000, I want to add a video to it. Maybe put it as a GIF, because that video will take so much time to load and most people don't have that kind of a phone connection. Why is this rendering so badly on my Android? It has to render on phones because now people have gone into mobile first for browsing, even if they would still prefer to see it on a larger laptop screen. That flexibility I have. So that I kept in-house. So do it systematically. Work out the math, work out the numbers, work out the cost, then work out which functions are critical for you to keep in-house, which functions you can sort of outsource. So for example, servers, you don't need dedicated server space. Nobody does it anymore, right? Put it on the cloud. All of those security features are very, very
robust.
Yeah, they're quite strong right now, right? So it's not the way that it was before. And when you go into it and when you enter this field, go with that mindset of it is still a great opportunity. People are still figuring this out. I also have a chance. And it's not just I also have a chance. It's, wow, this is a great time for me to enter. And then go into it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Sounds good. I want to know one thing you have done during the lockdown, which you've not done otherwise.
One thing that I have done. So I'm a huge extrovert and I like being in the field. And one thing which is same is the number of hours that I work is probably the same, which is surprising or not so surprising. But, you know, I like working. To me, that's people talk about work-life balance. And I keep saying, you know, for entrepreneurs, there's no work-life balance. It's work-life harmony. You get energized by your work. You like it. You enjoy it. You get, you know, you bring it back when you're at home. You get energized by your home life. You bring it back at work. I used to be that way. organically topics will come up at the dinner table because my brother's in the business, my father's in the business. We discuss it, and you always are looking forward to the day. Even when there's a challenge, you look forward to it because you feel supported. I have my team, I have my family. We're all in this, right? We'll go through. But so the number of us has been the same. But because I am based in Bangalore, my whole family is based in Chennai, and both my husband and I are both entrepreneurs, and he's in cold storage, which is an essential services. So he's working harder than ever. There's me. Now we don't have any maids or nannies. We don't have a live-in, and I have a 3-year-old son. So I think becoming a teacher for him, getting used to him disturbing all my work calls, it's a miracle that he hasn't stepped in right now. And because I've locked the door, the balcony door is the only place in the house where I know that he cannot come and disturb me. But getting used to that, really, when I talk about work-life harmony, that's a huge change. Everybody in my team knows my son. He will come and he will see them all on those Zoom calls, and he will call them out and he'll say, you didn't, why are you looking so scruffy today? Because he's 3 years old and he can say things like that. So I think in a way it has actually been a very unexpected time. But it's also that I never thought that I would be sitting here doing crafts with him and teaching him, playing with him and babysitting him to this degree, but it's happening and we all do what we have to do. And my team has been also very, 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 very understanding that it's hard, to do all of this and to run a business at the same time.
Sure. More power to you. I love the phrase, work, not the word harmony. It's the word harmony, not the balance. It's the harmony which brings in.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, love.